Welcome, and thanks for stopping by. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to our podcast on one of your favorite platforms, I'm glad you're here. At this time, I would like to thank our partners and sponsors for their dedication to helping the show to grow. We cannot do what we do without their help.
Hey everybody, you reached the Millennium Beat. I'm your host, Kevin James. Today I have on the computer Rick and Jane McKinney. Rick and Jane, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I am so glad to have you. I don't really know anything about you, but by the time we're done, I'll know everything about you. Now, pretty close to not everything, but so let's start off right away. Rick, jump right in and tell us where you're from.
Well, originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. My father was a pastor for 55 years, and so we moved a lot. I think by the time I graduated from high school, I'd been to 13 different schools. So
Wow.
we moved a lot. I spent some years in Western New York, and then finished up grade school and junior high and high school in Middletown, Ohio. So I was raised as a Christian. I became a Christian very early in life. But like a whole lot of folks who make that decision, I was probably a pretty nominal Christian. Didn't read my Bible much, didn't pray much. Had to go to church. Didn't have a choice about that.
No choice.
As far as a real intimate, personal relationship with God, it was pretty lax. And at 13 years old, there was a youth group who came up from Texas, and they had a relationship with God that I'd never seen anybody have. They talked about him. They were excited about him. They were passionate. And at the end of the week, they sang a musical, a Christian musical, the first Christian musical that came out, Good News. And at the end of that presentation, I walked the aisle and gave my life fully and completely to the Lord. It's interesting because our whole youth group did that night and absolutely revolutionized our life. We began witnessing and sharing our faith at school. By the time I graduated from high school, all but about 3 or 4 of our graduating class had accepted Christ. It was during the middle of the Jesus Revolution. It was you couldn't explain what God was doing, and so it was a fabulous thing. You could put a lot of labels on what happened to me. To me, it doesn't matter what the label is. It turned my life inside out and changed my perspective about everything. After that, about a year, God called me to preach, and I pastored for about 50 years. But we've done all kinds of things, and it's been very interesting life.
Wow, that is cool. Now you're 2M, no, not MK, PK, pastor's kid. But what did your grandfather do? Was he in the mission field, or was he a pastor, or what was his story? Your grandfather.
That's part of the interesting story. My father was born in Harlan County, Kentucky, a very rough section of Kentucky, coal mining section. My grandfather was a coal miner. My great-grandfather was a coal miner. My dad was raised in a home where they knew nothing about Jesus, and God was never mentioned. Church was never attended. And my dad lived right across the tracks from where the African-American folks lived. And he noticed, as he was chopping wood every day, that on Sundays, they would all jump in a pickup truck, all the kids in the neighborhood on that side of the tracks would go
Right.
off somewhere. One day, the old man that took them saw my dad watching, and he said, "Do you want to go to church?" Well, my dad didn't know what church was, but he figured it had to
Right.
be better than splitting firewood. So he ran and asked his mom, and she said, "Yeah, you can go. Just be home for dinner." And he went. That's the first time my dad heard the story of Jesus. And
Wow.
so a few years later, he gave his heart to Christ and left Harlan County, went to Cincinnati, and studied there and became a pastor for 55 years until he got
Wow.
sick and couldn't pastor anymore, or he'd still be pastoring. I have no doubt.
Right.
He loved Jesus with all of his heart. So that's my heritage. My grandfather was an alcoholic. He was a bootlegger, but he and my grandmother and my aunts and uncles eventually made decisions under my dad's preaching. And
Cool.
so we'll spend
That's
eternity with them. And
That's awesome.
it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. That's a good story. I like those. I like stories. I come from an older generation that still tells stories, still likes stories. I don't know if the younger generation as much. They don't really care much about their history, or most of them don't. So,
They don't.
so they really don't. That's a sad thing. It's, I mean, it's like the Jewish culture. I always talk about in multi podcast that I've had. I can't speak at the moment. It's too early in the morning for me. No, actually, I'm usually up really early. That they would tell stories from generation to generation. So it's
That's a very interesting story, because in itself, my doctorate degree is actually in storytelling, and
Okay.
so when I teach Old Testament to my college students, I tell them about the Jewish table, and around the Jewish table they would recite these stories over and over and over, and it's very interesting because the parents would tell the children, but the grandparents would be listening. And if the parents made a mistake, the grandparents would correct them. That's how these stories were passed down accurately for all those generations. And
Right.
You're right. The newest generations don't think linearly like we did, and that's how stories are
Right.
told. They're much more into circular reasoning. So it's difficult, I think, sometimes for them to understand the kind of storytelling that we do.
Right.
But it is an important part of who we are, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yes, it definitely is. Because it passes on. There's some things that you human touch or human interaction is the only way to pass things on. You could read things in a book or hear things in a story or watch a video, but it's that table time. And I think we've lost that. We've lost that table time. I mean, we're families. I don't remember it much, but I'm sure it was happening. Is that you sat around, the father came home, from work, the mom had the food on the table. We all sat down. I don't remember because I grew up an only child of 5. So, and I always tell people that story is my oldest sister is 12 years older than me, and my next brother is 6 years older than me. So when I was growing up, most of my brothers and sisters were already in their teen years and are out of the out in high school, into college, getting married. So I always say I grew up an only child of 5. So it's just the way it is, because it was just me and my parents. Because again, when I was 6, my brother was 12. So and then when I was getting a little older, he's 18, so he's like ready to move off and go to college and stuff like that. So most of the time it was just me, my mother and father, and my father lived until I was 17, and then he unfortunately passed away with cancer. Not sure about his status. They were Catholics. My mother, I'm pretty sure on. My dad, I don't really know. I just became a Christian. I was at an Amway convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we went to a church service on Sunday, because they said, "Hey, anybody want to stick around?" So we said, "Sure, we'll stick around." And I went forward, and that was back in, I think, 1981. So, but I was just in 81. I was a junior or something like that in high school. So where today's a lot different. But that's interesting about your story about how your father and your grandfather and stuff like that. So Jane, what about you? What's your story?
Well, I'm from Oklahoma. I always like to say that strongly. I'm a proud Okie.
I met people from Oklahoma once. I used to drive buses, and I had a group from some school or something like that in Newark, New Jersey, or Newark, Maryland, whatever it is, where they say the same. It's the same spelling but a different name. So they went there, and I got a shirt that said Oklahoma on it.
I am the oldest of 4. When I was 12, however, my father left us, And so my mother had never worked. She had never driven. And she went, my grandfather actually took her to downtown Oklahoma City to get welfare.
Okay.
And they gave her a job. They gave her a job instead.
Oh, wow.
And so,
Okay.
yeah. So she started in the basement of the water department, and she worked then the whole time that I was growing up after that. And she worked her way up to be one of the buyers for the city of Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And she has since retired and is in assisted living and is an amazing woman, just a strong, strong woman of God. She took us to church every Sunday. And I also made a decision for Christ when I was 6 years old. However, much like Rick's story, I didn't really know Jesus personally. I mean, I knew that he lived in me, but until I got older. And actually, probably not until I met Rick. And I was and still am a singer. So I went to Oklahoma Baptist University under a scholarship for music. And surprisingly, on the second week of our freshman year, I met this amazing young man who was only 16. And we pretty much fell in love right away.
How old were you at the time? How old were you? You said, how old were you at the time?
I was 18, but yeah.
So you like the younger men, huh? So younger men.
Well, I liked him.
Oh, you liked him? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we got married in between our sophomore and junior year. So the last 2 years of college, we were married. So.
Okay. Wow.
We've been married almost 50 years. Next June will be 50.
It's good to see people married that long. It's and still you're still kicking and you're doing things together. And you're a pastor's wife at one time, because you said you had a church that you were pastoring for a while. And so I don't know why I just thought of this. Tell me something exciting that happened. Like, do you remember your wedding? I'm just curious. Do you remember anything from that?
You want a story about our wedding?
Yeah. I don't know. It just came to my mind. I said, I want to hear a story about your wedding for some reason.
Okay. Well, the one that comes to my mind is our cake was in the fellowship hall. And the fellowship hall was not air conditioned. The auditorium was air conditioned. And where I was getting dressed in his dad's office was air conditioned, but they were trying to keep me out of the fellowship hall because it was so hot that the flowers were literally falling off our cake.
Oh, wow.
The cake was melting.
Yeah.
So they found as many fans as they could to repair the cake.
I was going to say, I'm assuming this is sometime in the summertime that you guys were married.
Yes, June. Yes, it was in June.
Yeah, because
very hot.
June, very hot time. Yeah. Okay. So, what were you saying, Rick?
A couple of stories about our wedding. One is that my father married us, of course, and he was a tailor. He sewed. He loved to sew. And so when Jane was trying to pick out her wedding dress, she couldn't really find one that she liked exactly. She liked this part of this one, this part of another one. And so my dad volunteered to make her wedding dress. And he made her wedding dress from scratch. It is a beautiful dress.
Wow.
And I really love it. And also, her dad, who had left when she was 12, she reconciled with her dad after we met. And I got to know him. Of course, he had his issues, like all of us do, but he was a wonderful man. He was a minister of music and had a beautiful voice. And he sang at our wedding, which was one of the greatest memories we have. He's gone now, but he just did such a beautiful job. And that's where Jane gets her voice. And she just was so happy to have him there. It was a little tense because we had Jane's mom there and Jane's dad there. And that relationship really never healed. But when I met Jane, I said, we can't be all that we need to be for Jesus if you have these bad feelings about your dad. We've got to figure out a way for you to forgive him and reconcile. And she did that, and we did that, and we had a great relationship with him. And I'm so happy for that. Yeah.
So let me just add one thing. As he was singing, I started crying, and so I was crying, and I did not have on waterproof mascara. And so black was running down my cheeks. And so his dad, who I think he was more concerned about the dress than me, but he whipped out a hanky and wiped my tears, so I wouldn't drip black on my dress.
Oh, wow.
It was a wonderful day.
That sounds like it. And it's interesting because that was many years ago. So do you remember those kind of stories and stuff like that? Now, 50 years. Now in 50 years, did you start a family or what's the story with that? Did you have any kids or?
Mm-hmm. We have 3 wonderful children. Our oldest, Jared, lives in Cincinnati, and he has our only grandson who is 12.
Okay.
Our middle daughter is Rebecca. She is not married, but she lives in Houston.
Okay.
Allowed to say?
I'll tell that story if you want to go on about.
All right,
Shoshana.
I'll go ahead. And then our youngest is Shoshana, and she is married and lives in Huntington, Indiana. So they are all.
Oh, wow. Now you said Shoshana, right? Is that how you said Shoshana?
Yes.
That's an interesting name. Where's that come from?
It is Hebrew for rose.
Hebrew.
And and Rick's grandmother's name was Rose. So it's named after his grandmother.
That's cool.
I wanted to tell you about Rebecca. Rebecca's our middle child. She loves Jesus. She's a worship leader in Houston, Texas, and she's a full-time therapist. And she's just a wonderful, wonderful person. Never dated, never had a husband, never had a boyfriend, and she's always wanted a child. Since she was a little girl, she would talk about wanting a child. And so she's really prayed about it a lot and just didn't know what to do. And she didn't want to marry the wrong person just to get a child. And so she called us a few months ago and she said, I found out about this thing called embryo adoption. And she said it's where a family has had in vitro fertilization and there are some leftover, I hate to use that word, but leftover embryos that they didn't use. And they're frozen, and if the parents want to, they adopt those embryos out to someone who can't have a child, and so
and after so long, the facility has to either discard them or do something with them. They won't keep them forever. Yeah.
So she'd found out about this. It's quite the process. It's just like adoption. The parents get to know her, and she gets to know the parents a little bit, not in face to face, but virtually, and they have to approve each other. And so, long process, very expensive process. But a few weeks ago, she had the embryo implanted. They did a transfer, and she's now 7 weeks pregnant. 8 weeks pregnant, excuse me. And so it's awesome. She's having a little morning sickness, and we're sad for the sickness, but happy for the pregnancy. And so next June, we're going to have a little girl. And we're so excited about that. So we'll have another grandchild. And there'll be 13 years difference between her and her cousin, but that'll be fine. That'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, it's like me with my cousins. All my first cousins now are in their mid 70s. You know, I mean, and some of them are no longer alive. They've gone on. Because I am the generation, and most of my first cousins are like my age in their 50s and 60s. You know, so it was, as I said, I grew up with all my second cousins. There's only 3 cousins that I have that were all the same age. Because everybody else was second cousins, second cousins. Because I don't know about one of them, but the other ones, my uncle couldn't have kids, so they adopted. So they adopted 2 boys. So that's why it was later. They were adopted, and their ages was pretty close to mine. I think I'm a little older than them, but in general, I grew up with my second cousins, and I have third cousins now that I've never met because I moved from Massachusetts. It'll be 30 years in June of next year. I've gone 30 years. I never thought I would be. Wow. You know, I always thought I was going to come back. Even the pastor, I had breakfast one day, and I can almost still see it in my head. He goes, "Oh, I believe you'll be back one day." And I go, "Yeah, okay." So he was prophetically saying I'll be back. I could have moved back in the early 2000s when my mother moved back up there before she passed away. but I didn't. Because at that time I was working for the Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN. So I was making good money. So I said I can jump on an airplane anytime I want. One time I flew. My aunt had a 90th birthday, but before that I was up there for the fall season. And then I got home and I got an invitation to my aunt's 90th birthday. So I booked a flight, and a week later I was back to New England again. But that's when I was making a lot of money. Yeah, now it's a whole different story. All right, so you got married. You said 3 kids? Yeah, I think so. Because you said one is married, one is just now pregnant as Rebecca. Good Bible name, and then the other one. So okay.
And
all right. So what was it like a little bit growing up with? I mean, you growing with the 3 kids in your family. Anything great and exciting happened during those I don't know, 15, 20 years? Pretty normal life? Nothing.
Pretty normal. We had Jared and Rebecca first. We thought we were done. And we had a boy and a girl, and they were both fine. Mm-hmm. And then Jane found out she was pregnant, and she lost the baby. And all of a sudden, when we realized that grief, we thought, man, we really do want another child. And so she got pregnant again, and at about 4 months started to bleed. And we thought we were going to lose that one. The doctor said we were going to lose that. But it's a very long story. But God healed her. One day she asked for the church to come up and pray for her. That's something our little Baptist church back then didn't do. They didn't lay hands on people. They didn't pray for people to be well. But they loved her so much that they came and did that. She went home from church that day, and the bleeding had stopped. And she called the doctor the next day and said, well, if this baby's born, it'll probably have brain damage because it hasn't had a blood supply for so long. And
he was very negative.
Very negative.
I can imagine.
A few months later, she delivered a baby girl that was almost 10 pounds. And
wow.
Huge.
That is Shoshana. And she is our most intelligent child, probably. She has an IQ off the charts. She is a college professor. Dr. Shoshana Hernandez is her name. And she is amazing. Yeah. And so we saw God do that miracle. And we've seen God do miracles like that our entire life. And so, raising kids, you have lots of opportunities for God to do miracles. And we saw God do that kind of thing over and over and over again.
Right. That's cool. I like that. Again, I love stories, and that is a good story. I mean, it's amazing. The doctors, they tell you facts. They're not faith. Most doctors, not all of them, but most doctors are fact doctors. They say this is the facts, black and white. It's live or die. It's but then there's faith, and it's good that your church stepped in and came and prayed. And even though the Baptists aren't really much into that, of laying on hands or praying for the sick. But, as you said, they love Jane. So they were there. So that was good. You had a good little church that supported you. So how long were you at that church? I mean, was that your dad's church, right, Rick? It was your dad's church?
No,
it wasn't.
That was actually at the first church I pastored.
That church.
I had done youth pastors and music pastors, worship pastors before that, but this was the first church where I was the full-time senior pastor. And, we've been to a lot of places since then. We've pastored several churches. We've done all kinds of ministry around the world, and it's just really been an amazing life. Really has.
So you talk about around the world. What is? Okay, I'm sorry, Jane. Go ahead. Say again.
Well, I just started to say our girls were both missionaries. To China. And
wow, that's
Shoshana actually taught English for 4 years in China, and so we got to go visit them. So we got to go visit them. We got to do a concert on stage in China, and we sang Christian songs, and it was at Christmas time. So we did Christmas concert. It was awesome. And then we got to go to Tibet, and it was. I can't even tell you how amazing that was. She took us to one of the temples and warned us how dark it was going to be, not light wise, but spiritual.
Right, yeah, spiritual wise.
And she said you may not be able to pray, but she said I suggest you take some scripture cards with you, So when you get inside, if you feel overwhelmed, you can quote scripture.
Okay.
And so we did, and she was right. It was quite dark, and but we came out on the other side, and we just saw some amazing things in Tibet. Wow. And then from there, we got to go to India, all on the same trip. We got to go to India.
Oh, wow.
And he got to preach. He got to preach out in the villages for 10 days. And again, it was very dark, but in this case, it was dark because there was no electricity. And the little pastor there had he had rented some equipment so that there would be some light. And, once we got under the tents, and it was just amazing. And we saw, I don't even know, hundreds of people come to the Lord, and we actually reached out and touched them. I actually touched their heads, people that came, to the altar, and you're not supposed to touch them because they're the untouchables. But I actually touched them and prayed for them. It was awesome.
We have a picture of Jane reaching out and touching the head of one of these untouchables, and then I get a little choked up. Then they would try to kiss our feet, and we were very uncomfortable with that. And our host pastor said, "Don't be uncomfortable with that." They take literally the scripture that says, "Blessed are the feet of those who preach the gospel." Yeah. And so it was an amazing time. It was very uncomfortable. It was the hottest we've ever been in our life. And the conditions weren't the best, but God was present. We had bodyguards most places we went to take us from the car to the stage and then back to the car. We were attacked by a mob one night who tried to turn over our car. So it was dangerous, but it was where God wanted us to be. And, that kind of leads me to one of the things we love to say to people. We told God 50 years ago that our answer was yes, that before he asked, the answer was already yes. And I think most of the time when God says, I've got something for you to do, we treat him kind of like we do our friends. We say, well, what is it? Well, I need to know what it is before I answer. But Jane and I told God that no matter what he asked us, the answer would always be yes. It could be uncomfortable. It could be expensive. It could be very costly. It could cause us to lose some friends or whatever it happened to be. But if God asked us to do it, we would say yes. And that has served us well. And I think it's served the kingdom of God well for the last 50 years because God has given us some opportunities to do things that are unbelievable. To travel the world. We've been to Mexico twice. We went there and built a house. We went to the orphanages and worked. We've been to the Navajo reservation 5 times. And just to see what God has allowed us to do. And I think it's because he already knows before he asks that our answer is yes. And I think God asks people whose answer is going to be yes to do things that other people don't get an opportunity to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you want to know about the big one?
The big one. Yeah. I want to know about the big one.
Do you want to know?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
The big one.
All right. Go ahead.
Well, the big one, that Jane refers to is, in 2005, I heard God speak to me, and I felt like God was saying, I want you to put the soles of your feet down from one side of the country to the other, from Los Angeles, California to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And because we had made this commitment to God that the answer was yes, then the answer was yes. And we weren't athletes by any stretch of the imagination, but we said yes to God. We prepared for a year. We walked about 1,500 miles the year before the walk. And then on January 1st, 2006, we left Santa Monica Pier and we walked 2,770 miles, 5 million steps each, 20 miles a day, 6 days a week for 6 months. And on July 4th, we walked into Washington, D.C. But we had an opportunity during those 6 months to share the gospel with hundreds and hundreds of people, to pray for thousands of people, to minister to homeless people. We went through 5 Native American reservations. We were accepted everywhere we went. We never felt threatened by people, and God did miraculous things all along the way. It was the toughest thing we've ever done in our life.
I can imagine.
The greatest thing we've ever done in our life. And it goes back to saying yes to God, and that's where it all starts, is saying yes to him.
You also, I'm also seeing in my head that you had to put your trust in God, because if you were walking, you probably had some backpacks and stuff like that, because you didn't know where you were going to stay, and you only had limited amount of food because you only can keep so much in your backpack. So you had to have faith of sleeping and eating, and well, in the bathroom,
Yeah.
obviously.
Actually, we did have our own camper, and
Oh, okay.
we would camp in the middle of where we were walking. But another miracle was that people came to drive our van and to take us out to where we were walking. And they would stay within 3 or 4 miles in case we needed anything, and then at the end of the day, take us back to our camper. So we
Okay.
did have a place to sleep
So you did have
and
a
our
place.
own
Okay.
food. Um,
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
but there was much trust. There was much trust involved.
Right.
Thankfully, it wasn't for sleeping and eating, but there was much trust
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
Basically, what we did was walk two-thirds of a marathon every day, day after day after day for 6 months. And your body
Wow.
never has a chance to rest and recover. And so what it does to your body, Jane had said earlier about almost a foot taller. I used to be a foot taller than her. But on the walk, I lost an inch and a half. I lost an inch and a half of height
Oh, wow.
from the compression on my spine of 5 million steps on pavement. And we
Wow.
both gained a shoe size, and because your foot spreads out when you walk
Okay.
that much, and it never recovers.
Back.
So lots of physical things, but again, the hardest physical thing we've ever done. There were times when I wanted Jane to give up. She had blisters from one side
Right.
of the country to the other. But she had made that commitment to God too, and she said, "Quitting's not an option. We're going to keep walking, and we're going
Right.
to keep doing what God has called us to do." And God always rewarded that every time we would kind of refresh that commitment to God.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going to do this. We're going to finish up. He just rewarded us with even more opportunities to share the message of Christ with people.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm hearing is also, it definitely, pun intended, it wasn't a walk in the park.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
ended up having to stay to wait to cross the bridge until they sent divers to clear it. But while we were there, a lady came from the Washington
Times.
and did an article and took color pictures. And
Okay.
because of the bomb threat that we thought was a delay, we actually ended up on the front page of the second section of the paper that next day, the Washington Times.
Wow.
And time after time, things that seemed like a delay or a problem, God
Mhm.
would use, and
Right.
He would use for His good, and that's what He does in our lives.
Mhm.
Things that seem like a problem. I mean, He says, "I will work those things for your good," and that's a promise
Right.
that we can claim. And He's
Mhm.
always been faithful to us.
Well, also seeing a life lesson here, because as I said, I'm starting to say, it was not a walk in the park. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you had challenges. I'm sure you had heat, you had rain, you had I don't know what time of year it was, so maybe you didn't have cold, but in general, you had things in like life. You go, it's like, not God doesn't say that we'll have once we accept Him as Lord and Savior, it doesn't say everything's going to be perfect. There's not going to be any challenges, no hiccups, no delays. But when you walked, basically that you literally walked out your faith. That's what I'm hearing, is you walked out your faith.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you had to trust in Him for everything.
Yeah.
We actually left in January.
Okay.
Because we were told it was best to go through the desert when it was winter, technically.
Okay.
And so, but we did in New Mexico. One morning, the coldest morning was 5 degrees. So we did walk in quite cold weather, and we had some snow. Actually, at the Oklahoma border, we had snow. So.
Oh, wow.
And then there was rain, and the only we had made a decision that the only thing we would not walk in was lightning, and so
Right.
we would have to sit out if there was a lightning storm. But we did
Okay.
see a tornado, and yeah, we saw pretty much all kinds of weather.
And I have to ask this question: have you ever, in a book form, documented your walk across, the United States? Have you done that? Is it?
We have. It took us.
Yeah.
It took us 17 years to get it finished. When we were walking, Jane journaled very
Right.
meticulously. She wrote down the name of every person that we met and every
Wow.
story that went with that person. And when we got home, I started taking that journal and trying to work it into the story. Then I'd put it away for a few years and get it back out. We finally decided this year, when I stepped away from the pastorate last December, we said this is an opportunity now that we have some time to take this story and really put it in book form. And so in May, we published the book, And So We Walked. And it's been amazing to see how that delay that we thought, people ask all the time, why did it take you 17 years? Well, one of the reasons we believe is because the opportunities that we have now, 17 years later, were not there 17 years ago. There were no podcasts, no social media to speak of, and all the ways that we've been able to talk about the walk and get this story out have really come up in the last few years. And so we've done about 30 or 35 podcasts and radio interviews all over the world. We've told this story about the walk across America 3 times in Nigeria, 3 times in the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and all over the United States. And over 100 countries have heard this story. And so we wanted the story to be, we've talked a lot about story today, and we did not want this story to get lost. We said there are too many wonderful things that happened during this 6 months. We saw God do too many things for us to pass away and the story never get told.
But we also did not want the story to be about us, because I feel like if we had done it in 2007 or 8, right after, it would have been kind of, look what we did story. And it's not about what we did. It's about how God helped us do it and what he did while we were walking. So the perspective, all these years later, the perspective has changed. We look back now and we see, we did it, and it's kind of hard to believe that we did it, but that's not what the story is. The story is that God helped us do it, and the lives that were changed while we were doing it. And now, like Rick said, because of social media and the podcast, now the story is getting out all over the world. So
we get emails almost every week from people that are reading the book. Hundreds of people have read the book now, and they write and they say, we read this book and it's changed our life. We've made a new commitment to Christ. We've seen that if you can do this with God's help, then we can do what God's called us to do. And it's just been amazing. And then we decided that since adults were responding so positively to this message, that we should put it in children's form. So a couple of months ago, we hired an illustrator, and we condensed the story down to about 42 pages, and we have released it as a children's book. And we have a very special project going on right now. People are helping us and buying copies of the children's book. Our goal is to put 500 copies of these children's books in pediatricians' offices all across the United States, so that when children are waiting to see the doctor, there's plenty of time for them to read the story. And the story does 2 things. One, if they don't know Jesus, it encourages them to accept Christ as their Savior. But secondly, and probably just almost as importantly, if they are a Christian, it encourages them to start telling their friends to join us in the command to tell our friends and our family and our neighbors about Jesus. So it's really been an amazing journey on this book. And then I've fallen in love with writing, and I've written a couple more books since then. We're getting ready to release a new book next month, and on witnessing and sharing, called Until the Whole World Knows. And so this has become, I always say now that paper and ink has become my pulpit. I stood behind a wooden pulpit for 50 years. And now I have a new pulpit. It's podcasts and radio interviews and newspaper interviews and reading to children in schools and going to the library for book signings and sharing this book with people. And it's just as effective. As a matter of fact, I've probably, in 50 years of preaching, I know that since May, I've spoken to more people about Jesus than I have the previous 50 years. And so it's kind of the glorious unfolding of what God has allowed us to participate in these golden years, these last years of our lives. And it's just an amazing thing, really is.
Yeah. I mean, before I do interviews and stuff like that, I really don't know a lot about people, but I'm hearing in my head, it's weird, I have done this before. Somebody's screaming and saying, hey, that book sounds like something I want to read. How can they get a hold of you? How can they get this book?
Yeah, real easy. They can go to our website. That's that's what we suggest, just because there are lots of pictures there of our mission trips and our blog, and just lots of ways that they can be ministered to. And that's real easy. It's just rickandjanemckinney.com. rickandjanemckinney.com.
Wow,
real
that's easy.
But all the books are available on Amazon as well. And we're happy for them to connect either way.
Yeah. It's available in paperback. It's available in e-reading form, like
Kindle, yeah.
And then it's also available, Kindle, and it's also available in Audible. Rick actually read it himself, so it's in his voice. Yeah, if you like.
We weren't sure about that when we began, but people said you really should do that. I like to listen to books in my car on the way to work.
Right.
And so it's very expensive to hire a narrator.
Anyway.
Right.
And so people said you should do it yourself. It would be better if it's in your voice, you telling your own stories. And so I did that. It took a few months to get it done. But it was very exciting, and people now that have read the book are getting the audiobook, and they say the audiobook is definitely the way to go because we hear the excitement in your voice, we hear the passion in your voice about the stories, and so that's really an awesome opportunity.
And if you like stories, it's full of stories.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's a storybook about everything that happened. Yeah.
And it's definitely. I've interviewed a lot of people. I think 60 or 70 people over the last couple of years, and I wouldn't say that you guys are the most interesting people, but you are pretty up there on the top. Actually, I'm going to look. You're right up there. Again, I don't know a lot of people. I found you on the internet, through guest pages and stuff like that. And I said, hey, they kind of look like something that would be interesting to do a podcast with. And until I do it, I've done some that I go, I wish I didn't do this interview, but not this one. This one is definitely, I really feel it was great meeting you guys and stuff. And we'll definitely put the link to your books and your website on the page and on the show notes and everywhere else that we do in social media. We'll basically post, and I myself will probably be ordering a book because I want to hear that story. When I was a kid, now I don't know if you ever heard of this book. It's because this is back in the 80s, called Walk Across America.
We read Peter Jenkins.
And actually there's a sequel because he walked from I can't remember because I was 18 years old or 17 when I read it. So that was a long time ago. But there was a second part where I think he picked up a dog or a wife or something like that, where he walked again, continue walking. Yeah. But he talks about his story about meeting up with family.
He walked the Appalachian Trail, the first book, down to Louisiana. That's where he met his wife. And then he walked west. He actually walked the Great Wall of China as well. Wow. He was quite a guy. And so we learned a lot from his book, as far as the logistics of making a walk. And we also talked to a couple other people who'd done long distance walking to give us advice and tell us what kind of shoes and all that sort of thing. So it was a big undertaking. Let me mention one thing real fast, if you don't mind, Kevin.
No, go right ahead.
The children's book. Yeah, the children's book. One of the reasons we're so excited about it is at the back of the children's book, we set up a special email address. The book is called They Walked Where? Rick and Jane's Big Adventure. And so we have a special email address at the back of that book, Rick and Jane's Big Adventure @gmail.com. And after a child reads it, they can email us. That's a dedicated email. It's only for that book. And they can email us questions. They can talk to us about Jesus. They can ask questions about Christ. About having a relationship with him, or just ask questions about our walk. How many shoes did you wear out? Those kinds of things that kids always want to know. And so we think that's one more way of reaching out to children because we're really sold on children's ministry. We did children's ministry for many years. And it's interesting, 94% of adult Christians say they became Christians and they made that initial decision to follow Christ before the age of 18. 94%. So we really feel strongly about reaching children and exposing them to the gospel. And it's different than when I grew up. It's different than when you grew up. Kids don't get taken to church now like we got taken to church. They aren't exposed to the gospel like we were exposed to the gospel. And we hope this book, it's very eye-catching, full color pictures.
Oh, wow.
It's very interesting looking. And we think kids are going to pick it up in the doctor's office, and then they're going to want to know. We gave one to our church children's department, and the first time it was read, one of the staff's daughter said, why was it so important for them to walk across America to tell people about Jesus? And what does this really mean? And she started asking spiritual questions about Jesus, which is exactly what we thought would happen. Yeah. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah. I definitely want to get one for, I'm on staff of a church, and I do all their media stuff, and then their children's church. I would love to get one and get them a copy of it, because it sounds like something they could use. We don't have a lot of kids because we have a small church, maybe about 50 or 60 at the max at times. But, kids, it varies, because they're all growing up. So they're all going into teen years. So, but yeah, there are a few, and that would be pretty cool. So that is awesome. I really enjoyed this interview, meeting you guys. It was really a good experience, and I just say thanks very much for taking your time out of your schedule. I know you were busy because we tried to schedule this earlier a couple of weeks, and then you were traveling and stuff like that. So, and I'm glad that you took it Saturday morning, and spending 45 minutes with me and telling my audience a little bit about you. And I'm hoping that people will listen to this podcast and check your stuff out, because I think it will help them out. And actually, I'm back into reading again, so that definitely sounds like a book. I'll get the children's book. That would be really easy for me to read. I'll get both. But Rick and Jane, thank you very much for being on. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
It was great. It was great having a conversation with you. It really was.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, you've been listening to the Millennium Beat with your host, Kevin James. I've been on the computer with Rick and Jane. Thank you again, Rick and Jane, for being here. I appreciate it. We like to encourage the world one story at a time.
This has been a Millennium Beat LLC production. Views and opinions of the guest are not always the views and opinions of the Millennium Beat LLC. Check us out on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and TikTok at the Millennium Beat, or on Twitter at Millennium_Beat. If you would like to partner with us to reach the world, go to our website for more information. You can go to themillenniumbeat.com or tmb2000.net. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. We couldn't do all we do without your support. The Millennium Beat just updated our website from the ground up. Check it out at themillenniumbeat.com, or you can get there by using millenniumbeat.com or tmb2000.net, where you'll be redirected to the millenniumbeat.com's homepage. I want to thank Mass Inbound for their awesome work on our website. If you're looking for somebody to build your site, I recommend them. You can reach them at massinbound.com. That is massinbound.com. These are some of the things that you can find on our website. Homepage. You can watch our latest YouTube video or listen to our audio podcast. Also listed are some of the platforms our audio podcast is on. You'll find out when the next podcast will air and who the guest will be. On the top right, you will find two red buttons, Learn How to Help and Become a Guest. Under Learn How to Help, you can become a partner, sponsor, contributor, or contribute to the future Millennium Bus. You can give one time or monthly recurring. The choice is yours. The other button is Be a Guest. Click it, go to the form, and fill it out, and we will get back to you. We would love to hear your story. Click the About Us drop-down where you'll find stats, where we are reaching people, and to find more information on our sponsors. Click on the podcast drop-down, then click on the calendar tab where it will tell you when the shows will air and who will be on them. Or if you need to know about any meetups of the Millennium Beat staff, partners, or listeners. Also, there might be on the calendar an event at which the Millennium Beat staff will be at. Click the Guest tab for all previous guests, links to their website, social media pages, and any store they might have. Click the Forms drop-down. There you'll find a release, Be a Guest, or Become a Sponsor form.